Most Americans learned a new word this week, USAID. The agency hit the public consciousness over the past couple of days after it landed in the crosshairs of Elon Musk and his Doge operations, and since then, the Trump administration has halted its operations, furloughed members of its staff, and taken down its website.
As we dug into USAID, it became apparent that what we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a bowl of worms. And so at the point at which you don't merely, like if you've got an apple and it's got a worm in it, maybe you can take the worm out. But if you've got actually just a bowl of worms, it's hopeless. And USAID is a bowl of worms.
Mm-hmm.
There is no apple. And when there is no apple, you've just got to basically get rid of the whole thing. That is why it's got to go. You know, it's beyond repair.
For thirsty Republicans, there have been no shortage of liberal tears in response to these actions, which is honestly hilarious given the fact that most of them just learned the USAID even existed, and the rest seem to have no clue what it actually even does or what operations they are currently defending.
Do you want the executive making the only decisions in this country, or do you want the elected representatives that you sent to Washington making those policies?
That's right. Democrats seem to find themselves all of a sudden deeply concerned with the Constitution and following it to a T. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer even took to the floor to issue this warning.
We also know this is just the beginning. If Doge attacks USAID today, then you can be sure they'll move on to another target tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the Postal Service or the IRS or even the Social Security Administration. They could be next. Or maybe our national security agencies.
The fact that he thinks this is somehow a threat to at least half the country is hilarious. Nothing could flip me into a Trump supporter faster than if he were to actually enact those threats Chuck Schumer just made. So Democrats are being whipped into a frenzy by their party leaders. And, I can forgive the fact that the vast majority of people are too busy to keep a running list of every government agency out there and what their operations are, given the fact that we don't actually even know how many government agencies we have. That's right. We know there are at least 440 or so, but we're not exactly sure where the list ends. What I can't forgive, though, is the raging hypocrisy on the left right now, the defense of what the USAID is actually doing, or the ignorance that is on full display. And we need to talk about it. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like the video and please subscribe to my channel. I release new shows every weekday at 7 p.m. So also hit that notification bell so you get reminders. So the USAID dates back to legislation that was passed under JFK, which reorganized and consolidated U.S. foreign aid programs into a single agency, allegedly to promote economic development, humanitarian aid, and democracy worldwide, which you have to admit has a much better ring to it than promoting regime change, funneling money to special interests and friends, and funding risky research that gets people killed.
Many Americans may still have the idea that USAID is a government agency delivering relief at disaster site overseas. They may still remember the bags of rice or grain with the USAID logo on them. But that is not USAID. USAID is a key component of the U.S. government's regime change operations worldwide. USAID spends billions of dollars every year propping up NGOs overseas that function as shadow governments, eating away at elected governments that the U.S. interventionists want to overthrow. Behind most U.S. foreign policy disasters overseas, you will see the fingerprints of USAID. From Ukraine to Georgia and far beyond, USAID is meddling in the internal affairs of foreign countries, something that would infuriate Americans if it was happening to us.
There's no USAID project on God's green earth that is honest. If we are irrigating the rivers, or irrigating the agricultural fields in a country, it's because we're trying to control the territory there. If we are working on the water supply, it's because we're trying to control the rivers. If we're we're working on famine relief, it's because we're trying to control the food supply and make inroads into the indigenous populations there. If we are helping them write their constitution and go through democratic legal reform, it's so that we can control their laws. Every single thing USAID does is dual purpose. It's dual purpose by charter. They're only allowed to do the things that advance U.S. foreign policy interest. And we just put a little bow on top of it, and we say, in the process, we're making the world a better place. Because it's it's going to these humanitarian groups who are administering this thing, which in the process will help U.S. foreign interests. But the fact is the worst scandals in American statecraft in the 1960s and 70s and maybe early 80s were the CIA. In recent years, the worst scandals in American statecraft have been USAID, from funding the Wuhan lab to growing heroin in Afghanistan and irrigating the poppy fields, to setting up fake Twitter in Cuba with an explicit USAID document saying that the plan is to have algorithms favoring sports news and hurricane updates. And then once we have enough people, switch to get them to hate their government and topple their government and take to the streets in smart riots.
The USAID has flown under the radar of most Americans because its operations are typically focused overseas, and also because it tends to prop up many of the media outlets in the foreign countries it is meddling in. So the American people are not getting a huge heads up on what's actually going on. USAID is a rogue agency. It has very little oversight, and it's been allowed to run rampant by both Democrats and Republicans for decades and decades. Most egregiously, and at the top of my list of issues with it, this is one of the organizations that we know, thanks to the White Coat Waste Project, who I am a fellow for, funded Patient Zero in the Wuhan lab. And they funded Patient Zero in the Wuhan lab by funding gain-of-function research, which was illegal at the time, and which also necessitates the torture of animals, by the way, which is why the White Coat Waste Project is involved. We work to stop taxpayer-funded animal torture. They got the receipts many, many years ago, proving that numerous government agencies were involved in this. They've been ringing the alarm, but top of the list has been the NIH with Dr. Fauci and the USAID. We have the paperwork showing that they were illegally funding this research in Wuhan, which most people now believe, as do I, led to the creation and leak of the pandemic. And not only is that overtly corrupt, not only does that need to be investigated, not only was that allowed to continue happening for years after COVID-19 broke out, they've been still spending tens of millions of dollars, your dollars, in this same capacity with absolutely no check on them. But what's even more egregious than that is how they have been doing it, because this is how they operate, okay? This is their whole scheme across a myriad of different sectors, but they were funding this research by taking your tax dollars and funneling them to a quote, quote, nonprofit. That nonprofit was called Echo Health Alliance. It was a nonprofit basically in name only. It didn't do any typical nonprofit activities. What it did was make friends in the government who then passed it huge government grants, millions and millions of dollars that they were then able to use at their discretion, and that they also could then contract other friends with, give lucrative, cushy contracts and consulting agreements to. And it's a giant circle jerk that repeats throughout the government. This is how the politicians and the entire political sector that operates around them continue to launder your money into their own pockets. It is an embezzlement scheme on the American people that has allowed huge sectors of both the Democrat and Republican apparatuses to leech off our tax dollars. These people are fat ticks, and they have been draining our country of resources for decades, and they must be stopped. So I, for one, am so thankful to see this finally get some real attention. We've had a number of people in Congress like Rand Paul and Joni Ernst and Nancy Mace who have been working to blow the whistle on this and to enforce some kind of accountability, but they have been completely abandoned by a large sector of the Republican demographics in Congress and by almost the entirety of the Democrat Party, because they want to protect their friends and the special interests who are involved in this scheme. So even though the Democrat Party supposedly is against harming animals, even though the Democrat Party is supposedly concerned with public health. They have stood in the way of actually getting in and auditing these agencies that were involved with this kind of corruption. They have run cover for them, and they have prevented us from being able to not only deal with what they have done in the past, but to prevent these kinds of reckless actions in the future. And believe it or not, this whole scandal is literally just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the USAID's crimes against humanity. Here's Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt with another quick briefing of absolutely insane things these people are spending your money on.
Through USAID over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government.
It cannot be emphasized enough that they are funding many of these insane programs as a way of laundering your money. Take Ukraine, right? That's Democrats' new prize policy issue of the moment, and which USAID has been heavily involved in. Have you ever stopped to think that their rabid support for this war is just a little weird? Has it ever struck you as odd that there is over $1 billion US dollars that has been funneled over to Ukraine that we cannot account for? Like, come on. If you are a Democrat at this point, you have to wake up. Your party has lost its minds. You are no longer the anti-war party. You are not the humanitarian party. You have to be seriously checked out to believe that. These are the actual operations your party is convincing you to defend at the moment. These kinds of scandals, these kinds of operations, and all they have to do is tell their base, like, nah, these people are the good guys. They're administering humanitarian aid, as if humanitarian aid can't be administered by any entity besides the government, first and foremost, which is just absolutely cracked. But secondarily, as if government agencies typically even do what they claim to be doing. Obviously, we know that government agencies are plagued with corruption and perverse incentives, and that it's very, very likely over the past 6-7 decades since this thing's been around, it probably got off mission. But they don't even stop to think about that, right? Like, just look at this. There are people falling for it. All of these sheep standing outside the USAID over the past couple of days, protesting this as their leaders whip them into a frenzy. Their leaders are doing that because they are getting money out of this whole scam, but their people are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. It's ridiculous to watch. Like, if you have this knee-jerk reaction to just be opposed to absolutely anything Trump does, or to believe that anything Democrat leaders are supporting is inherently good, man, I just feel for you trying to get around in the world. It's got to be tough out there for you, because being that gullible is going to make you a prime target for a lot of scams. But what do you all think about all this? I'm curious. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I do enjoy reading them, and I try to respond to as many as I can. And while you're there, also make sure to like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel too. I personally just think it's kind of hilarious to watch this all go down. Like, all of a sudden, Democrats deeply care about the Constitution when their piggy bank gets raided. Give me a break.
What Trump and Elon and all of their cronies are trying to do is take away the constitutional power of Congress. We get to decide. We have the power of the purse. We get to decide where money is allocated, and it's the executive's power to make sure that that money gets to where it needs to get.
Democrats might be in short supply of common sense, but what they are not in short supply of is audacity. Can you imagine being Ilhan Omar or any of the other Democrats that have been in office over the past 4 years while the Biden administration has pulled some of the biggest tricks I've ever seen to get around the Constitution, to expand the powers of the executive office, and you didn't blink an eye because you were too daft to think that maybe those powers would be used by somebody you didn't like in a short 4-year period time to stand up to them. I mean, it's absolutely insane to me that Democrats never thought that could backfire on them once, because they just believe that they have this country on lock. They believe that they are so close to being able to have one party control. And I guess they were right. I guess they have gotten pretty close to getting there, which is why, while I still have massive issues with Trump, way too many issues to fully ever get behind him as a supporter, I do have to say that that is a major silver lining in my book, is that you finally have somebody getting in there and pushing back on the uniparty and actually standing up to it. Now, I don't think he's going about this in the right way. I think he's also doing things to circumvent the Constitution, to expand the power of the executive, to circumvent Congress. I don't support those things. I think our country was designed brilliantly and intentionally to actually have a system that could restrain the government, restrain the growth of power. And the more we allow that to be circumvented, the more legal precedent we set for the next person to do even worse damage. We end up getting bigger and bigger government, more and more corrupt politicians, and less ability to rein them in. So I can cheer many of his actions without always standing behind the way he's going about it. But either way, I cannot sit here and look at Ilhan Omar or other Democrats come in here and claim to care about the Constitution or our processes. These are the same people that were wanting to expand the Supreme Court so that they could pack it when they lost one election. These are the same people who have been looking at throwing out the Electoral College. These are the same people who are absolutely fine with the Biden administration coming in and censoring the American people online. You better pipe down all the way. The fact is that Trump is doing what he was elected to do. And this is good Trump. This is a good action. I don't think that he is circumventing the law here. He might have to go through Congress in order to fully shut down the USAID since it was enacted via legislation. But even without going to that extreme, he and his Secretary of State do have broad powers to come in and reform its operations. They could even take away its independent status and make it part of the State Department, which I think they should do. And I really have to applaud everything they're doing right now. I think this agency needs to be gutted, and then they need to go on to the next one.
You're now the head of USAID. The head of Doge, Elon Musk, called USAID a criminal organization and added that it is time for it to die. Do you agree with that?
They have basically evolved into an agency that believes that they're not even a U.S. government agency, that they are a global charity, that they take the taxpayer money and they spend it as a global charity, irrespective of whether it is in the national interest or not in the national interest. One of the most common complaints you will get if you go to embassies around the world from State Department officials and ambassadors and the like is USAID is not only not cooperative, they undermine the work that we're doing in that country. They are supporting programs that upset the host government for whom we're trying to work with on a broader scale and so forth. So they're completely unresponsive. They just don't consider that they work for the U.S. They just think they're a global entity and that their master is the globe and not the United States. And that's not what the statute says, and that's not sustainable.
Can it be reformed, or does it need to die?
Well, that was always the goal, was to reform it. But now we have rank insubordination. Now we have basically an active effort where their basic attitude is, we don't work for anyone. We work for ourselves. No agency of government can tell us what to do. So the president made me the acting administrator. I've delegated that power to someone who's there full time, and we're going to go through the same process at USAID as we're going through now at the State Department. I think there are this is not about getting rid of foreign aid. There are things that we do through USAID that we should continue to do that makes sense. And we'll have to decide, is that better through the State Department or is that better through something, a reformed USAID? That's the process we're working through. There are things that are happening at USAID that we should not be involved in funding, or that we have a lot of questions about. But they're completely uncooperative. So we had no choice but to take dramatic steps to bring this thing under control.
Americans have not had a real representative government in decades, maybe even over a century, because of this deep state, this fourth branch of government, which works to undermine our Constitution, to steal our money, and to circumvent the will of the people. So if our country is to have any future, it must be destroyed. I personally am glad to see these kinds of actions coming out of the Trump administration. I love the work that Doge is doing. I'm also very excited because there is a huge opportunity on the table for people in state government right now to follow in these footsteps. The REINS Act, REINS, REINS Act, is hitting state legislatures across this country. We've got one that's moving in Indiana. We've got another that was introduced in Georgia just this week. We've got more coming down the pipeline. I know North Carolina is going to have a bill. I believe Montana is going to have a bill. This is exciting. exciting times. The REINS Act simply does what this is doing, but at a state level, because lawmakers are supposed to set the laws. The REINS Act says that unelected bureaucrats cannot come in and make regulations and make laws that have not gone through a legislative process and that have a fiscal impact on the American people without at least having a constitutional review process by the legislature. This is a way for both Democrats, right? If you're a Democrat and you claim to be so upset about this happening, you're so worried about the growth of the executive, then put your money where your mouth is and support the REINS Act. Put the power back in the legislature. The legislatures across this country have been delinquent for far too long. They've let the fourth branch seize power. They've let these people who are unelected come in and run our lives, and they need to get a hold of them. They need to rein them in. If they don't do that, then this country is a sham. We don't have a representative democracy if the people we elect are not the people who are actually governing our lives, but instead it's random unelected bureaucrats we have no power over, no ability to hold accountable, no ability to kick out of office. So the REINS Act is such an opportunity to take this kind of energy even further. There's a lot of work to do. Like I said, we don't even know how many government agencies we have in this country. That is insane. Democrat and Republican lawmakers who truly do value the Constitution, who truly do want to work for the American people, this is an easy path forward, and I look forward to working with any of them who take it. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I am a one-woman band here, so if you want to support my show and my work, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel consistently. Tuning into my episodes every night at 7 is the best way to help me grow, and it means the world to me. I'll see you tomorrow.